They call each other comrades, but in their eyes, trust has vanished. Only calculation remains. The world has grown used to seeing Russia and China standing shoulder to shoulder, two powers united against the West. Bilateral summits, declarations of unlimited friendship, and carefully staged handshakes in front of flashing cameras have painted the picture of a strong, stable alliance. But what happens behind the curtain? What lies behind those smiles, if not chilling intelligence briefings, silent internal investigations, and suspicions quietly burning within the most powerful institutions of the Russian state? It's time the world sees the Russia-China alliance not only through diplomatic lenses, but with the understanding that not every embrace signals friendship. Some are merely tight enough to keep the other from stepping away. This is not the story of a war. It is the story of a crisis of trust, one that is quietly dissolving an alliance built on shared isolation, and now collapsing in silence. The mask of alliance. When unlimited friendship becomes a wisp, or in the shadows. There are alliances in this world forged in blood, in war, in firm handshakes between heads of state, under the flash of cameras. But there are also alliances, colder, more calculating, born out of geopolitical loneliness, forged in the fires of global sanctions and the desperate hope for a way out. The relationship between Russia and China in recent years is precisely such an alliance. When President Vladimir Putin and President Xi Jinping clasped hands and declared to the world that their friendship was without limits, with no forbidden zones, many believed a new axis of power was being formed, a counterbalance to the West. A united front against sanctions, a shared shield against American influence. But beneath those smiles lies a fracture, and behind the words, a plot. Recently, a leaked internal document from the FSB, Russia's powerful security agency, sent shockwaves through this perceived unity. It was not ambiguous, not speculative. In a blunt 8-page report, the FSB declared, "China is the enemy, not a partner." Those words struck like a cold blade, slicing through the diplomatic cloak that Moscow and Beijing have so carefully worn. It wasn't just a quiet internal warning. It was a bitter acknowledgement that in the world of great towers, trust is never absolute, and friendships between authoritarian leaders are as fragile as glass under stage lights. The FSB, speaking with the voice of an old, wary strategist, warned of China's strategic infiltration into the heart of Russia. No tanks, no missiles, only scholars, companies, and research institutes cloaked in the guise of collaboration. Every bit of data collected, every mineral contract signed, the FSB said, is part of a long-term design by China to gain access to Russia's resources, geography, and future. Even more unsettling is the idea that those once called comrades may now be digging beneath your soil. The true enemy no longer stands across the battlefield. He sits beside you, sipping tea, signing memorandums, and publishing academic papers with your state's seals. The FSB did not merely accuse, it expressed fear. It saw Russia weakened by sanctions, increasingly dependent on China for technology, for trade, for survival. It feared that, without caution, Russia may lose its most precious assets, its sovereignty and strategic intellect. In the grand game of global power, nothing is eternal. A friend can become a predator the moment you reveal your weakness. And Russia, consumed by a costly war in Ukraine, isolated from Western markets, its industries shrinking, is drifting deeper into the gravitational pull of its colossal eastern neighbor. Unlimited friendship, or a limited game, where both sides hide their final cards. In this tense drama of the 21st century, the words "China is the enemy" are not just a piece of intelligence, they are the first toll of a bell announcing the slow collapse of an alliance that once seemed unshakable. A bell not ringing over battlefields, but echoing through the corridors of power, where shadowy calculations are building a new world, one of betrayal and shifting loyalties. And now, the world looks at Russia, no longer as the mighty northern bear, but as an old companion just waking up to the terrifying realization that it has slept beside the dragon for far too long. The enemy behind the mask of alliance. In a world full of handshakes and declarations of unlimited friendship, sometimes the enemy doesn't come from across the battlefield. They quietly walk through the back door, disguised as a friend. Russia once saw China as its greatest ally amid mounting global sanctions. But now, the veil of camaraderie is tearing apart, thread by thread, as Russia's most powerful security agency, the FSB, speaks out. China is the enemy, not a partner. This statement is not just an intelligence observation, it's a political verdict. It exposes a truth long simmering beneath the surface, obscured by performances of diplomacy and orchestrated smiles. The FSB, in its cold, seasoned voice, like that of an old wolf that has seen too much treachery, accuses China of systematically conducting espionage on Russian soil. Not loudly, not with grand gestures, but through conferences, academic collaborations, and environmental projects. Seemingly harmless ventures have become gateways into the very heart of Russia's national security. These agents do not wear black hats, they come as professors. They don't sneak into secure rooms, they open universities and sign memoranda of understanding. And in each geological survey, each research paper, there may lie a hidden data stream serving long-term strategic goals, not of science, but of geopolitics, military technology, and global influence. The FSB claims that China is actively recruiting spies from within Russia itself, luring individuals willing to sell critical information, from military operations and defense technologies to strategic data regarding the war in Ukraine. If that is true, then the gravest threat to Russia no longer comes from NATO or the West, it comes from someone who once sat beside them, toasted champagne, and called them comrade. The bitterness here does not lie in the fact that China is spying. That is common practice among world powers. The deepest wound lies in the betrayal of trust. In the midst of war and isolation, Russia opened its doors wide to its eastern neighbor. But in seeking refuge from global exclusion, they failed to see that the one stepping in was bringing the tools to unlock every drawer of their fragile house. The world believed that Russia and China were bonded like shadow and flame, united in opposing the West and dreaming of a multipolar world. But this alliance was never truly based on trust. It was born out of convenience. Russia needed China to sell oil, gas, and to avoid economic collapse. China needed Russia to study military tactics, control supply chains, and expand influence in resource-rich Siberia. A relationship built on short-term need is now unraveling under the weight of long-term ambition and silent calculation. The FSB knows modern espionage does not fire bullets. It uploads data. It doesn't need to break a window, only an invitation. And in the eyes of Russia's intelligence elite, China does this better than anyone, even the CIA. Now, in the cold corridors of power, a haunting question echoes. Has Russia been sleeping too long beside the dragon, unaware that it may be the very land the dragon seeks to devour? The curtain has fallen, the accusation has been spoken, and the world must now confront a bitter reality. In an era of strategic partnerships, sometimes the true enemy is the one who knows you best, because you were the one who let them in. The silent blueprint when geopolitical ambition wears a Chinese face. On the grand chessboard of global power, some pieces move so slowly that observers mistake them for being still. Yet it is often those silent moves that prove the most dangerous, for they make no noise, but gradually take control of the game. China, in the eyes of many analysts, is not a quick, brute force player. It is a builder, an architect of long-term ambition. And woven into the winding curves of the New Silk Road, hidden beneath mining projects and environmental research institutes in Siberia and the Arctic, a territorial blueprint is quietly taking shape, sharp, calculated, and deliberate. According to leaked documents from Russia's Federal Security Service FSB, China is far more than just a trade partner or political ally. It is a power force quietly expanding its sphere of influence, not through warfare, but through strategy. Resource-rich borderlands, vast frozen lands in Russia's Far East, Siberia, even the Arctic, regions that appear desolate to most, are central to Beijing's vision of bilateral development. But beneath that diplomatic phrasing lies a chilling assessment from the FSB: long-term strategic designs on Russian territories. China doesn't make declarations. It doesn't issue threats, it simply invests. Gradually, it builds railways, opens universities, establishes geological companies and climate research institutes. And through these, it collects land data, geological maps, mineral reserves, not just for science, but for future leverage in the brutal realities of global power games. Indeed, Siberia, a land many associate with frost and isolation, is seen by China as a strategic vacuum. And if Russia, weakened by war, sanctions, and economic retreat, loses its grip, will that vast territory remain protected from silent claims? Or will it become a bargaining chip in the unforgiving game of geopolitics? Beijing doesn't speak of territorial expansion. It speaks of co-development, but in the realm of great powers, we all know, development can be a subtle synonym for influence. And when that influence seeps into territory, into resources, into data, the border begins to shift, not on the map, but in strategic reality. Russia, once the big brother of the Soviet bloc, now stands beside a China that is no longer the student. It is a giant, and because it is a giant, its shadow can stretch over lands that Russia has yet to protect. If vigilance falters, China's silence may become occupation. And if Russia does not act, that long-term blueprint will slowly turn into reality. And by the time it is recognized, it may be far too late. Academia as a front, when knowledge becomes a weapon without sound. In an era where guns have given way to data and influence, espionage no longer enters a nation through traditional doors. There's no need for lock-picking or crossing borders under the cover of darkness. Spies arrive in broad daylight under the name of knowledge and cooperation. They wear lab coats, ID badges, and pass through security with academic invitations. They are scientists, students, scholars, and sometimes they carry an entirely different mission. Russia's Federal Security Service FSB has raised a serious alarm. China is using academic cooperation as a cover for sophisticated espionage operations inside Russian territory. What appears harmless, a research paper on the environment, an international seminar, a geological survey, is, in fact, becoming an extended arm of Beijing's silent but calculated geopolitical strategy. China doesn't infiltrate noisily, it doesn't need troops. It sends scholars, people with degrees, credentials, and most importantly, access. They're invited to Russian universities, research institutions, and strategic regions like Siberia and the Arctic. There, they collect data on land, minerals, infrastructure, information that may seem purely scientific, but is, in fact, critical intelligence for any future territorial or resource-based strategy. The FSB calls it academic cover, a mask that is elegant, intellectual, and legal, but behind which lies an organized information-gathering network. In this picture, universities become transit hubs for data, academic conferences turn into resource-sharing platforms, and researchers, whether knowingly or not, become bridges for the strategic ambitions of a rising power. The most alarming part is not how many are actual spies. It's how many don't even know they're helping them, simply because they believe they're doing science, advancing human progress. When knowledge is exploited, it becomes a double-edged sword. On one side, it opens the doors of enlightenment. On the other, it slices into the heart of unsuspecting nations. Russia now understands it faces not only a militarily powerful China, but also one that is proficient in soft power, adept at using the language of academia to unlock doors that weapons never could. When an ally becomes a shadow, the silent symphony, the fading alliance between. The Russian bear and the Chinese dragon. There was a time when the world saw Russia and China as an inseparable duo on the global chessboard. One was the Arctic bear, once the mighty Soviet Empire. The other, the Eastern dragon, rising rapidly as an economic superpower. When they clasped hands and declared a friendship without limits, many believed a new world order was forming. One where Russia and China stood united against the West, balancing out the dominance of the US and NATO. But not every handshake is a sign of trust. Some are clenched with fingers curled around hidden eyes. Some diplomatic smiles are mere masks concealing a bone-deep suspicion. And now, the curtain is slowly being pulled back. A leaked document from Russia's Federal Security Service FSB has stunned the world. In it, China is no longer referred to as a friend, but as an enemy, a force quietly infiltrating, exploiting, and manipulating Russia from within. This declaration isn't just a piece of intelligence, it's a warning. A tolling bell signaling that the alliance has already fractured, silently. On the surface, Russia and China still call each other partners. High-level meetings continue, joint projects are still being signed. But beneath this facade, a hidden war is unfolding. The FSB claims that China is recruiting spies, collecting strategic intelligence, and using academic partnerships to access sensitive regions, from Siberia to the Arctic. No tanks, no planes, just scholars, investors, and researchers steadily expanding China's reach. And Russia, in its desperate search for allies after Western sanctions, it opened its doors to why. And now, it must ask itself, did we invite a neighbor who doesn't just want dinner, but plans to redraw the map at the dining table? This alliance was never born of ideological harmony. It was a marriage of convenience and isolation, where both nations found temporary relief in their shared grievances against the West. Russia needed China to buy oil and keep its sanctions-strangled economy alive. China needed Russia to expand its influence in neglected regions, observe battlefield tactics, and gain access to discounted resources. But as one side weakens and the other grows stronger, the balance shifts. And when dependency grows too deep, trust begins to rot. The FSB has seen it, and this time, it will not stay silent. Russia hasn't publicly declared a breakup, China hasn't severed ties. But like a relationship that has lost its soul, both parties now maintain appearances for the sake of optics. Every embrace has a measured distance, every word, a hidden meaning. And the world, if it listens closely, will hear the cracks spreading across the once proud wall of alliance. This is not just a diplomatic disagreement, but a crisis of trust in the 21st century. At first glance, one might assume the tensions between Russia and China are merely a clash of interests, a temporary strategic rift between two supposedly friendly powers. But in truth, what is unfolding goes far beyond a routine diplomatic dispute. It is a deep-seated crisis of trust, a silent rupture that exposes the limits of any power alliance built on convenience rather than conviction. When the FSB, Russia's highest security agency, flatly declared that China is an enemy, not a partner, it wasn't a linguistic accident. It was a strategic break, uttered in the shadows, reverberating like thunder in a cloudless sky. This moment reveals a fundamental truth in international relations: shared interests may unite nations, but only mutual trust can keep them together. And when that trust is corroded by suspicion, espionage, and silent infiltration, even the most unbreakable alliances can crumble like castles made of sand. Russia now looks at China not as a fellow traveler, but as a force it once trusted, and now fears has betrayed it. It sees within the scholars, the corporate partners, and the scientific collaborations the faint outlines of a deeper ambition to redraw the map of influence without ever firing a bullet. China, with its far-sighted strategy, has masterfully cloaked its influence operations in the language of academia, environment, and trade. But that cloak is now being peeled back, layer by layer, by the very country that once embraced it as a friend. This is no longer a matter of contracts or diplomatic handshakes. This is a test of national trust, sovereignty, and the thin line between ally and adversary in an age where war is waged not with tanks, but with data, influence, and silent presence. For the world at large, it is a sobering lesson. No alliance is immune to collapse, and the one seated beside you is also the one quietly measuring your every breath. Let me know if you'd like this included in a longer form article, documentary narration, or adapted into a